Day 1183 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 976,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 980 in the past day. Then as for hardware, 1 tank, 2 APVs, and 23 artillery, largely mirroring the low loss counts seen yesterday, but also, you could say, largely mirroring what can be seen from satellite imagery when looking at Russian military storage bases. These images were taken from the Sentinel-2 satellite, which makes it more difficult to discern numbers due to the 20 to 30 meter optical resolution. Nonetheless, it looks like many of the BMP-1 infantry fighting vehicles, if not all of them, that were stored at the entrance of the base at their Kostroma facility northeast of Moscow have been removed over the winter, aligning with the state of affairs of many other storage bases inside of Russia that we've seen. In fact, the Soviet stock drawdown is becoming so prevalent that I'll likely start posting regular updates on this type of data soon. Then headed to the map, where Ukrainian UAVs may be picking up pace in strikes against military assets inside of Russia after having to maneuver through the political environment of peace talks and limited ceasefires. And now, longer-ranged AFU drones struck into Russian territory, targeting multiple regions including Oriol, where drones have attacked a military electronics plant. The plant supplies products to at least 19 enterprises of the Russian military-industrial complex related to the production of aircraft, missiles, vehicles, and drones. UAV strikes were also seen flying into Voronezh, Rostov, Kursk, Belgorod, and Kaluga, but also occupied Crimea and Moscow, where the mayor of Moscow said 3 UAVs were shot down. Bryansk also took a hit, with approximately a dozen Ukrainian drones, as confirmed by Russian telegram channels coming inbound from the Sumy region. Bryansk Governor Bogomaz expressed concern for the incident, just like many other times, and is someone who is usually quite vocal about the potential for AFU incursions into the region. Now, Bogomaz, elected 3 times in 15 years, belongs to Putin's United Russia Party, with Putin since removing the cap of consecutive terms for regional governors. This is important to note because most administrative regions throughout Russia, in fact a whopping 85 out of 89, have governors elected from the Putin United Russia political party, with the very few remaining exceptions to this coming from the poorer, low-profile areas, 4 in total, although this is certainly by design. You can't have 100%, just like Putin's election results, offering some level of plausible deniability. But in other words, for Russia, this is what you would call single-party dominance for 95% of the country, and has been that way for well over a decade. This isn't just unusual, it's a statistical impossibility in true Western democratic terms. But then again, this is Russia. Then headed across to Kursk, where Russian forces are seen using a makeshift raft to transport personnel and supplies with a light utility vehicle and trailer across the Oskil River, roughly 100 miles northeast from the closest front lines of Kursk. Now, there's no information to suggest that the AFU ever struck a bridge anywhere near this area, which means Russia did this to themselves, all on their own. It's the corrupt misappropriation of funding, leading to a lack of infrastructure projects. But above all, for this example, such a slow and inefficient way for their army to travel. Meanwhile, during a local governor meeting, Putin was told by the Kursk governor that Sumy must become their own, and said as part of a follow-up response to Putin's question on how much of Sumy should Russia invade. That was effectively the question from Putin himself. And of course, Putin did not object to the response, but instead responded to say, quote, "That's why Alexander Yevsevich was elected. He wants more too." Implying that the governor was elected because he wants more northern Ukrainian land, just as Putin does. Then headed down the map to Kharkiv, as Russia is amassing troops near the oblast ahead of a possible attack. With this information coming as per Chief of Staff of Ukraine's 13th National Guard, the Katia Brigade. But in any case, with Ukrainian Defense Forces stating they're prepared to repel any assault. Now, this might actually tie in with the previous news, because given those makeshift water raft forces in Kursk that were seen crossing a river directly north of the entry point to Kharkiv, then this might be one such example of precisely what is to come. Then headed down the map with what could be considered Russia's main spring offensive push between Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka, continuing along and over the highway as part of two wider but separate encirclement tactics, both east and west. It's known that the Spartan Brigade is using armoured vehicles to strike Russian positions, alongside Ukrainian drone operators, counter-attacking from above as a means of stabilising the situation by targeting ammunition stores as well, designed for replenishment, including this example into the Russian rear of this direction, a sizable pop-off with secondary explosions. Otherwise, for this front now, it comes down to seeing what level of containment the armed forces of Ukraine can muster, and if they respond with counterattacks as well. Then headed further south on the map into Zaporizia, where a heavy night bomber drone pursued a Russian 9S-36 radar station of the Buk air defense system, certainly damaging it, with the extent of damage unconfirmed, although the radar station vehicle was not moving in the footage after the late night drone-dropped munition strike. Also in Zaporizia, Ukrainian forces scored a direct hit on a Russian Mr. S self-propelled howitzer. This must be the third in as many weeks, which is not a lot, but certainly above average for Russian deployment this year or last. With precisely 10 Mr. S SPGs seen en route to Ukraine from Russia's far east about 3 weeks ago now. So we might be looking at 3 down and 7 to go. Then taking a look around the map as somewhere in the east, a Ukrainian fiber optic FPV drone destroys a small ammunition depot hidden in a hangar. Next, a Russian assault group on a single tank was stopped by the Birds of Madiyar unit, first hit then further hunted down. And then in a similar fashion, 2 Russian infantry fighting vehicles with poor driving and/or coordination skills took on fire from above, leading to the utter destruction of those vehicles not long after they were trying to storm Ukrainian positions. Also seen on the map, seen was a rare Russian BTR MDM Rakushka armoured personnel carrier and a BTS-4V armoured recovery vehicle that were joining the ranks of Russia's scrap metal army. The Rakushka armoured personnel carrier, with only 100 or so ever built, are generally unarmed in most configurations, even though they're a specialised VDV vehicle. As for the recovery vehicle, the BTS-4V, it's a much older Soviet design from the 60s, but why even bother to use it for recovery? Because at least 9 times out of 10, that would be a grueling, slow, one-way trip for Russian operators. Then also on the map, footage of a damaged Ukrainian-operated Max Pro MRAP, seen here driving back to friendly lines by sheer willpower. Hell of a job, hell of a driver. Then headed across to a little bit of news now, with no surprises to be found from that Monday Trump-Putin call. Although discussions centered on initiating a ceasefire in Ukraine and where Putin expressed a general willingness to engage in peace negotiations, as he always frames it, but declined to commit to any immediate 30-day unconditional ceasefire proposed by the US, which Ukraine had already accepted. Instead, Putin went into various conditions for a future ceasefire and proposed drafting a memorandum for future peace talks, with no location or date set for that event. Around and around we go. It's the same old outcome, expressing a willingness for peace, avoiding a 30-day unconditional ceasefire like the plague, and pushing talks out to the next event and the next event and so on. President Zelensky and 5 other European leaders contacted Trump after his call with Putin, expecting to hear on a ceasefire agreement of some description, or no ceasefires at all, followed by Trump imposing new sanctions on Russia, but were unpleasantly surprised with Trump instead commenting that Putin had agreed to talks, but with Trump stressing that the United States would not participate in those talks, and also rejecting the idea of imposing sanctions on Russia at this time. In part due to avoiding some escalation and having some future leverage over Russia, but also, oddly, due to the reason that sanctions on Russia may hinder future business and trade opportunities with Moscow. Difficult to get behind a comment like that. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Rubio has indicated that the US is working with NATO partners to source additional Patriot systems for Ukraine. At the same time, Rubio said that the US is waiting for ceasefire terms from Russia, but is in no hurry with new sanctions, echoing Trump's comments, with Rubio also stating that he will understand Putin's calculations much better when he sees what these terms look like. Round and round we go. I'd say, as of now, Putin has bought himself another 2 months of stalling from the US administration, with the Kremlin always planning for new excuses. Meanwhile, the European Union is prepping to deal a real blow with the 18th package of sanctions against Russia, which is already being developed. It is expected to affect 2 key areas that could seriously hit Russia and undermine the financial basis for its war: energy resources and the financial markets. This next sanctions package is expected for a June release, with the full contents of the package to be announced soon. Then to a couple of news tidbits to round off the video today, as popular Russian aviation-linked Telegram channel Fighter Bomber reports that the Russian military's project of the production of the A-100 AWACS aircraft, which was supposed to replace Russia's small and aging and somewhat destroyed fleet of its older A-50 AWACS planes, with reports now that the AWACS 100 radar planes has closed production. The reason for the closure is manifold and likely due to the inability to procure imported components due to sanctions and lacking the sufficient funding to purchase those specialized components in the first place. Then to round off the video with something that, in its own Russian way, relates to the above story, where the steering wheel of an updated Russian Lada Vesta in the country was shown to have locked up at speeds of 66 kilometers per hour. And just like previous attempts to salvage the AWACS radar plane project, in order for Russia to keep its automotive sector going, it's just another example in a long list of disturbing cutbacks to its automotive sector, where parts are replaced with cheaper components, all aiding to seriously compromise the safety of these Russian-produced vehicles. And in many instances, missing components altogether for current year models, be it air conditioners, stereos, and much, much more. We've seen so much of it in the past. Now, as for what caused this particular malfunction is not specifically clear, but what was clear is on the Russian driver saying he won't be getting back into this car anytime soon. Russia couldn't export these cars to Europe or North America, even if they wanted to. There's just no way they're passing even the most basic of automotive safety standards. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment. So thanks once again, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!